The lamplight in the rough plank hall turned every face to amber, and Penelope Nash stood with her back against the far wall, watching the couple spin past like leaves caught in a current she'd decided long ago not to join. She had come tonight because Sarah Mackenzie had begged her to help with the refreshment table, and because staying alone in the cabin one more Saturday evening felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to name. The spring dance was the first real gathering since the snows melted, and half of Bittyroot Crossing had turned out. Miners and ranchers and their families packed into the Mercantile Association Hall with fiddles scraping out reels that made the floorboards jump. Penelope kept her hands busy folding napkins, arranging tin cups, anything to look occupied. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. "You planning to stand there all night like a fence post?" Sarah appeared at her elbow with a knowing smile. She was round-faced and persistent, the kind of woman who believed everyone deserved joy whether they wanted it or not. "I am helping. You are hiding." Penelope gave her a look. "I came. That is what you asked. I asked you to enjoy yourself." Sarah glanced across the room and her smile turned sly. "Fletcher Garrison is here. Came down from his ranch for the first time in months. He keeps looking this way." "Then he is probably thirsty. The punch bowl is right beside me." Sarah laughed. "You are impossible." She drifted away to greet someone else, and Penelope let herself breathe. She knew Fletcher Garrison by sight and reputation. He ran a cattle operation up in the High Valley, brought beef down to sell in town every few months, paid his bills, spoke quietly, and minded his own business. He was somewhere in his 30s, solid built, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile much but remembered kindness. She had noticed him noticing her once or twice over the winter, a long glance across the general store, a nod of greeting on the snowy street. She had looked away every time. The music shifted to something slower. Couples paired off, men leading women into the gentle sway of a waltz. Penelope turned toward the refreshment table, but a shadow fell across the cups. "Madam." His voice was low and careful. "Would you do me the honor?" She looked up. Fletcher Garrison stood a respectful 3 feet away, hat in his hands. His eyes were gray-blue, calm as a winter sky. There was no boldness in his face, no presumption. Just a question. Her first instinct was to refuse. She had refused every dance, every invitation, every kindness that felt like it might crack the walls she had spent 2 years building. But something about the way he waited, patient and unhurried, made her pause. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was Sarah's voice in her head. Maybe it was the exhaustion of holding herself so tightly all the time. "One dance," she said. "One is all I am asking." She set down the napkin she'd been clutching and let him lead her onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, light and steady. She placed her hand on his shoulder and felt the warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt. They began to move. He was a better dancer than she expected. He guided her smoothly through the turns, never stepping on her skirts, never pulling her closer than proper. They did not speak for a long moment. The fiddle sang and the floor creaked, and she felt her body remember something it had forgotten. Movement. Ease. The simple animal pleasure of not being alone. "You are Mrs. Nash," he said finally, "Penelope." She didn't know why she offered her first name, it just slipped out. "Fletcher Garrison." "I know." A flicker of something crossed his face, surprise maybe, or pleasure. "I have seen you in town." "I have seen you too. But you never looked like you wanted company." "I did not." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. They turned past the makeshift stage where the fiddler sawed away. The other dancers were laughing, talking, calling out to friends. Penelope and Fletcher moved in a pocket of quiet. "I should tell you something," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. I will say yes to this dance. I will not say yes to hope. He looked down at her. His eyes were steady. Hope, whatever you might be thinking. I am not looking for anything. I am not interested in courting or companionship or any of the things people seem to think a widow ought to want. She expected him to pull away, offended or embarrassed. Instead, he just kept dancing, his hand firm at her waist. "All right," he said. "All right. I heard you." He turned her gently past another couple. "I am patient with both." With what? The dance and the hope. She missed a step, stumbled slightly. He steadied her without comment. She looked up at his face, trying to read him, but he just looked back at her with that same calm expression, as if he'd said nothing remarkable at all. "You do not know me," she said. "No, madam. You do not know what I have been through. I expect I do not." "Then you should not make promises about patience." "I did not promise anything." His voice was quiet. "I just told you the truth." The music ended. He released her immediately, stepped back, and gave a small nod. "Thank you for the dance, Penelope." He turned and walked away before she could think of a response. She stood in the middle of the floor, feeling the phantom warmth of his hand at her waist, and wondered what exactly had just happened. Sarah appeared at her side like a conjurer's trick. Well, what?" "You danced with Fletcher Garrison. The whole room noticed." "It was one dance." "It was a start." Penelope shook her head and returned to the refreshment table. But for the rest of the evening, she found herself glancing toward the door, wondering if he was still there, and hating herself a little for wondering. She walked home alone through the muddy streets. Bitterroot Crossing was hardly a town, just a scatter of buildings clinging to the creek where men had found gold 5 years ago. The gold was mostly played out now, but enough miners stayed on, stubborn or hopeful or simply stuck. The ranchers in the surrounding valleys brought the settlement its real commerce now, selling beef and buying supplies. Penelope's cabin sat at the edge of the camp, a single room with a wood stove and a narrow bed, and very little else. She had sold most of her belongings after Thomas died. She had not wanted reminders. Thomas Nash had been a miner, quick to laugh and slow to worry, and he had died of fever in the autumn of 1881 while Penelope sat beside his bed and felt powerless. Before that, there had been a child, a daughter born too early one winter, who had lived 3 days and then slipped away in the night. Penelope had buried her grief so deep she sometimes forgot it was there, but it lived in her bones, in the way she held herself apart, in the walls she'd built to keep the world at a distance. She did not want to feel that kind of loss again. She did not want to love anything that could be taken away, so she had decided not to love at all. She lit her lamp and sat at the small table, staring at nothing. The dance felt like a mistake. She should not have accepted. She should have stayed behind the refreshment table where it was safe. But Fletcher Garrison's words circled in her head. "I am patient with both." What did that even mean? She did not know. And she did not intend to find out. Spring deepened into summer. The mountains turned green and the creek ran high with snowmelt. Penelope worked in the garden behind her cabin, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil. She took in sewing and mending enough to keep herself fed. She went to church on Sundays because Mrs. Mackenzie would come drag her out if she did not. She kept her head down and her heart locked up tight. Fletcher Garrison came to town every 2 weeks like clockwork. She saw him at the general store, at the livery, once at the church. He always nodded to her. She always nodded back. He never approached. He never tried to speak to her beyond a polite greeting. He kept his distance, and she told herself she was relieved, but she noticed things. Small things. The way he helped old Mr. Cartwright load his wagon without being asked. The way he paid for his goods in cash, never running a tab. The way he listened when people spoke to him, really listened with his full attention. He was steady, reliable, the kind of man people turned to in a crisis. She told herself it did not matter. She was not interested. In late June, a family of settlers passed through Bitterroot Crossing on their way west, and their youngest child fell ill. Penelope heard about it from Sarah, who heard about it from the store owner, and before she quite knew what she was doing, she found herself at their camp offering to help. The mother was exhausted, the father frantic. The little boy, no more than 4 years old, burned with fever. Penelope had no training as a nurse, but she had sat beside Thomas's bed for a week straight, and she had learned a few things. She knew how to cool a fever with wet cloths. She knew which herbs to brew into tea. She knew how to hold a child's hand and speak softly and wait. She sat with the boy through the night while his parents slept in their wagon. She bathed his forehead and made him drink water and told him stories about nothing in particular. Somewhere near dawn, his fever broke. He opened his eyes and asked for his mother, and Penelope felt something crack open inside her chest. She stumbled out of the wagon and sat on the ground, shaking. The sky was turning pale. Birds were starting to sing. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe. Penelope. She looked up. Fletcher Garrison stood a few yards away, holding his horse's reins. He must have just ridden into town. He looked at her for a long moment, then tied his horse to a post and came to sit beside her on the ground. He did not touch her. He did not ask questions. He just sat. "I did not know you were here," she said finally. "I was passing by, saw the wagon, thought they might need help. The boy is better." "That is good." They sat in silence. The sun crept over the mountains. Penelope's hands were still shaking. "I had a daughter once," she heard herself say. She had not meant to tell him. She had not meant to tell anyone. "She died when she was 3 days old. I held her the whole time, and then I had to let her go." Fletcher did not say anything. He just nodded slowly. "And then my husband died, and I decided that was enough. I decided I would not let myself care about anything again because I could not survive losing anything else." "But you just sat with that boy all night," Fletcher said quietly. "I know. So maybe you already care more than you think you do." She looked at him. His face was gentle. There was no judgment in it, no demand, just understanding. "I lost a wife and a baby," he said. 8 years ago, the baby came wrong and neither of them made it through. I built my ranch after that. Worked myself half to death. Figured if I stayed busy enough, I would not have to think about it." Penelope felt her throat tighten. "Did it work?" "For a while. But then I realized I was just existing, not living, and I thought maybe that was not what they would have wanted for me." "So you decided to live again?" "I decided to try." He looked at her. "It is not easy and it is not fast, but it is possible." She wanted to argue with him. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that some losses were too big, that some walls were meant to stay up. But sitting there in the dawn light with the taste of someone else's fear still in her mouth, she could not find the words. "Thank you for sitting with me," she said instead. "Anytime." He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. His hand was warm and calloused, a working man's hand. He released her as soon as she was steady. "I should check on the boy's family," he said. "Make sure they have supplies for the road. That is kind of you. It is just common decency." He tipped his hat to her and walked toward the wagon. Penelope stood watching him go and felt the first small crack in the fortress she had built. Summer blazed hot and dry. The creek shrank to a trickle. Dust hung in the air. Penelope worked in her garden in the early mornings before the sun got too fierce, and spent the afternoons inside with the shutters closed. She had taken on more sewing work, and her fingers were always busy with needle and thread. Fletcher came to town every 2 weeks, regular as the mail coach. Sometimes she saw him. Sometimes she did not. When she did, he always greeted her politely and went about his business. He never lingered. He never pressed. But once in a while, if she was carrying something heavy, he would materialize at her elbow and offer to carry it for her. If she was struggling with a stubborn door, he would open it. Small gestures, nothing that demanded gratitude or acknowledgement, just quiet helpfulness, offered and then withdrawn. It irritated her. It also confused her. Most men would have given up by now, or grown impatient, or turned to someone more receptive. Fletcher did none of those things. He just kept showing up, steady and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. In August, Mrs. Mackenzie invited Penelope to a church social. Penelope tried to refuse, but Sarah had perfected the art of relentless cheerfulness, and Penelope found herself at the church lawn on a Sunday afternoon with a plate of biscuits she had baked and a determination to leave as soon as politely possible. Fletcher was there. Of course he was. He stood talking to Reverend Cole, nodding at something the older man was saying. When he saw Penelope, he gave her a small wave. She waved back before she could stop herself. Sarah pounced immediately. "You should go talk to him." "I should not. Penelope, that man has been patient as Job. The least you could do is have a conversation." "I talked to him." "You say hello, that is not a conversation." Penelope set down her biscuits on the long table and crossed her arms. "What do you want me to say to him, Sarah?" "I do not know. Ask him about his ranch. Ask him about his horses. Ask him anything. Just stop treating him like a stranger." "He is a stranger. He is a good man who is interested in you, and you are terrified of that." The words hit harder than Penelope expected. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Sarah's expression softened. "I loved you through losing Thomas," she said gently. "I watched you bury yourself along with him, and I understand why. But honey, you are still alive. And that man over there understands grief in a way most people do not. Maybe that is worth something." Penelope looked across the lawn. Fletcher had finished his conversation with the Reverend and was now helping set up tables, lifting them as if they weighed nothing. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and she could see the sun-browned strength of his forearms. He moved with an easy competence, no wasted motion. "I do not know how to do this," Penelope said quietly. "Do what? Let someone in?" Sarah squeezed her hand. "You do not have to let him all the way in, just maybe open the door a crack." Penelope took a breath. Then, before she could lose her nerve, she walked across the lawn. Fletcher looked up as she approached. His expression was carefully neutral, but she thought she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Hello," she said. "Hello. You are far from your ranch today." "I try to come to church when I can. Reminds me I am part of something bigger than my own troubles." She nodded. They stood there for a moment in awkward silence. Penelope searched for something to say. "How is your ranch?" she managed finally. "Doing well. The cattle are healthy. Got a good calf crop this year." "That is good." "It is." He shifted his weight slightly. "How is your garden?" "Surviving the heat. Barely. Mine too. I have been hauling water up from the creek every night." Another silence. This was excruciating. Penelope felt like she had forgotten how to have a normal conversation, how to be a normal person. But Fletcher did not seem uncomfortable. He just waited, patient as always. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for sitting with me that morning, with the Settler family. You do not need to thank me, I do. It helped." He studied her face for a moment. "You helped that family, that took courage." It felt like foolishness. Courage often does. She found herself almost smiling, almost. "You have an answer for everything." "Not everything. Most days I barely know what I am doing. I find that hard to believe." "It is true." He glanced toward the church. "After I lost my wife, I did not speak to anyone for about 6 months. Just worked the ranch and kept to myself. Reverend Cole used to ride up once a week to check on me. I would barely say 2 words to him, but he kept coming, and eventually I started talking again." What made you start? I realized I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life alone, or I could try to be part of the world again. Neither one was easy, but one of them seemed like living. Penelope looked down at her hands. I am not sure I know how to live anymore. You are doing better than you think. His voice was gentle. You are here, you are talking to me, that is a start. She looked up at him, his eyes were kind. There was no pressure in them, no expectation, just steady, patient regard. I am not ready, she said, for anything more than this, I know. I might never be ready. That is all right, too. She felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. You are strange, Fletcher Garrison. I have been called worse. This time she did smile, just a little. He smiled back, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less weathered. They stood there in the afternoon sun, two people who had lost too much, and for a moment it felt almost easy. I should help with the tables, Fletcher said, and I should check on my biscuits. Maybe I will see you later, maybe. She walked back to where Sarah was standing and tried to ignore the knowing grin on her friend's face. Autumn came in a rush of gold and crimson. The aspens on the mountainsides turned bright as fire. The nights grew cold. Penelope spent her days putting up vegetables, preparing for winter. She had lived through 2 winters in Bitterroot Crossing, and she knew how brutal they could be. Fletcher continued his regular trips to town. But now, when they saw each other, they talked. Small conversations, nothing deep. He told her about his ranch, about the challenges of winter feeding, about the pack of wolves that had been prowling his upper pastures. She told him about her sewing work, about the new family that had moved into the cabin down the road, about the first snow that had dusted the peaks overnight. They were careful with each other, circling like wary animals, but circling closer. In October, he brought her a haunch of venison. Shot an elk, he said. More meat than I can use. She wanted to refuse, but the practical part of her knew she needed the protein for winter. Thank you. It is nothing. It is not nothing, he shrugged. Neighbors help each other. Is that what we are, neighbors? I would like to think so. She took the meat. I will make stew if you want to come by for supper. The offer surprised both of them. Fletcher's eyebrows went up slightly. You do not have to do that, I know, but it seems fair. You brought the meat, I will cook it. All right then, when? Tomorrow evening, around 6. I will be here. He tipped his hat and left. Penelope carried the venison inside and stood in her cabin, wondering what she had just done. The next evening she cleaned the cabin until it gleamed. She made stew with the venison, potatoes from her garden, carrots, onions. She baked bread. She told herself it was just a meal, just a thank you, nothing more. But she changed her dress twice and braided her hair with more care than usual, and she knew she was lying to herself. Fletcher arrived exactly at 6, carrying a jar of honey. From my bees, he said. You keep bees? Started a few hives last spring. Figured I might as well. She invited him in. The cabin was small, barely big enough for 2 people, but it was clean and warm. He took off his hat and looked around, taking in the simple furniture, the tidy shelves. Nice place, he said. It is just a cabin. It is a home. They sat at the small table and she served the stew. For a few minutes they ate in silence. The food was good, hearty, and hot. Fletcher ate with the steady appetite of a man who worked hard. This is excellent, he said. Thank you. I mostly cook beans and bacon. This is a real meal. She smiled despite herself. You should learn to cook better, probably. But then I would have no excuse to accept supper invitations. Was he flirting? She could not quite tell. She felt out of practice, rusty with this kind of banter. But something about the warmth in his eyes made her want to try. You get many supper invitations, she asked. Not as many as I would like. Maybe you should hint harder. I am not much for hinting. I tend to say what I mean. I have noticed that. They finished eating. Fletcher helped her clear the dishes without being asked. He washed while she dried, working in comfortable silence. It felt domestic, familiar, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. "I should go," he said when the last dish was put away. "Early morning tomorrow, of course." He paused at the door. "Thank you for this. It meant a lot." "It was just stew." "It was more than that." He left before she could respond. Penelope stood in her cabin, surrounded by the lingering warmth of his presence, and felt the walls around her heart crack a little wider. Winter arrived early and hard. By November, snow lay deep across the valley. Bitterroot Crossing hunkered down, families staying close to their stoves, venturing out only when necessary. Penelope spent her days sewing by lamplight, her fingers moving automatically while her mind wandered. She thought about Fletcher more than she wanted to admit. She wondered how he was faring up at his ranch, alone in the snow. She wondered if he had enough firewood, enough food. She wondered if he thought about her. In December, a blizzard hit. Snow fell for 3 days straight, piling up in drifts higher than a man's head. When it finally cleared, the town was buried. Men dug out paths between buildings. Children played in the snow. And Fletcher Garrison rode into town on a horse struggling through chest-deep powder. Penelope saw him from her window. She watched him dismount at the livery, saw the snow caked on his coat, the weariness in his movements. She pulled on her heaviest shawl and went to meet him. "Are you insane?" she demanded. "You could have died riding down here in this weather." He looked at her, snow clinging to his eyebrows. "I had to make sure you were all right. I am fine. I have food and firewood and shelter. I know, but I had to see for myself." Something in her chest twisted. "Fletcher, I know you did not ask me to worry. I know you did not ask for any of this, but I do worry, and I needed to know you were safe." She stared at him, this stubborn, patient man who had ridden through a blizzard for her. "You are freezing. Come inside." "I should check on a few other families first." "You should come inside before you lose your toes to frostbite." He smiled, that rare, full smile that changed his whole face. "Yes, madam." She made him coffee and sat him by the stove. He thawed slowly, his fingers red and clumsy around the cup. She heated water and made him soak his feet, checking for signs of frostbite. His toes were cold but not damaged. She wrapped them in dry wool and scolded him for his foolishness. "I have survived worse," he said mildly. "That does not mean you should court disaster." "I was not courting disaster. I was courting you." The words hung in the air. Penelope's hands stilled on the blanket she was tucking around his feet. She looked up at him. "I thought you were being patient," she said. "I am, but that does not mean I am not also courting you, slowly, at your pace, but courting nonetheless." Her heart hammered. "Fletcher, you can tell me to stop. You can tell me to leave you alone, and I will, but I think you know by now that I am not going anywhere, not unless you send me away." She sat back on her heels. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the stove crackled. Fletcher watched her with those calm gray-blue eyes, waiting. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "I know. I am afraid that if I let myself care about you, something will happen. You will get sick or hurt or just leave, and I will have to survive losing someone else." "That is possible," he said. "Life does not come with guarantees. I could leave tomorrow, or you could, or we could both live to be 90 and die in our sleep. There is no way to know. So what do? We decide if the risk is worth it." He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "I have already decided. I think you are worth any risk, but you have to decide for yourself." Tears pricked at her eyes. "What if I am not brave enough? You are the bravest person I know. You got out of bed every morning after your daughter died. You took care of your husband while he was dying. You built a life for yourself here in the middle of nowhere. That is courage. That is just survival. Survival is courage." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm now, strong. But I am not asking you to decide anything today. I am just asking you to think about it. And to know that I will be here however long it takes." She looked down at their joined hands. His hand was bigger than hers, scarred and calloused. It felt solid, real, safe. "You should stay until the weather clears," she said. "I will not have you riding back in this. I would not want to compromise your reputation. I think my reputation can survive, and you can sleep by the stove. It is warmer than the livery." He squeezed her hand gently. "If you are sure, I am sure." He stayed 3 days while the storm raged. They fell into an easy rhythm, cooking together, talking by the fire, reading from her small collection of books. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about coming west after the war, about the years he spent drifting before he finally settled and bought his ranch. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about the hope she had felt moving west and the despair of losing that hope piece by piece. They did not talk about the future. They just lived in the present, in the warmth of the cabin, in the quiet companionship of two people who understood each other's scars. On the 3rd night, the storm broke. The sky cleared to reveal a million stars. Fletcher stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. "I should head back tomorrow," he said. "I know, my cattle need feeding, and I have been gone too long. I understand." He turned to face her. "Will you be all right?" "Yes. If you need anything, send word. I will come." "I know you will." They stood looking at each other across the small room. Penelope felt something shift inside her, some tectonic movement of the heart. She was not ready to name it yet, but she knew it was there. "Thank you for staying," she said. "Thank you for letting me." He left at dawn the next morning. Penelope stood in her doorway and watched him ride away, his horse plunging through the snow. When he reached the top of the rise, he turned and waved. She waved back. Then she went inside and sat at her table and cried, not from sadness, from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Christmas came quietly. The town held a small service at the church. Families gathered. Penelope went and sat with Sarah and her husband and tried to feel festive. Fletcher was not there. He had sent word he could not make it down from his ranch. The snow was too deep. She told herself she was not disappointed, but on Christmas evening there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a package on her doorstep, wrapped in brown paper. No note. She brought it inside and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wool shawl, finely woven, dyed a deep blue. It was beautiful, clearly expensive. She held it up to the lamplight and felt its softness. Then she wrapped it around her shoulders and sat by the fire, feeling held. The winter deepened. January was brutal, one storm after another. Penelope stayed inside as much as possible, working on her sewing, reading, thinking. She thought about Fletcher constantly now, wondered how he was managing alone at his ranch. She imagined him feeding his cattle in the bitter cold, chopping firewood, sitting by his own fire in his own solitude. She wondered if he thought about her. In February, a rider came through town with bad news. There had been an outbreak of scarlet fever at one of the mining camps upriver. Several children were sick. The camp doctor had sent for help. Mrs. Mackenzie organized a group to go help. Penelope volunteered without hesitation. Sarah looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure? It could be dangerous, I am sure." "What changed?" Penelope wrapped the blue shawl around her shoulders. "I think maybe I am tired of being afraid." They rode out the next morning, Penelope and Sarah and 2 other women, carrying medicines and supplies. The mining camp was a miserable place, tents and rough shelters clinging to the frozen creek. The sick children lay in a makeshift infirmary, their faces flushed with fever, their breathing labored. Penelope moved among them like she had done this all her life. She bathed hot foreheads, spooned medicine into reluctant mouths, held small hands, sang soft songs. She worked until her back ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion. And somewhere in the midst of that work, she realized something. She was not thinking about her daughter. She was not thinking about Thomas. She was just thinking about these children, here and now, and what they needed. The past was still there, still painful, but it was not consuming her anymore. She had stepped outside of it, even if just for a moment. They stayed at the camp for 5 days. Most of the children recovered. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, got worse. Penelope sat with her through a long night, watching her struggle for breath, feeling helpless and terrified. She thought of her own daughter, that tiny, fragile life that had slipped through her fingers. She felt the old grief rise up, threatening to swallow her, but she did not run. She stayed. She held the child's hand and talked to her softly, and somewhere near dawn, the fever broke. The little girl opened her eyes and asked for water. Penelope gave it to her and felt tears streaming down her own face. Sarah found her outside the infirmary tent an hour later, sitting in the snow, shaking. "She is going to be all right," Sarah said, sitting beside her. "I know. You saved her. We all did." Sarah put an arm around her. "You are feeling again. That is what this is." "You are letting yourself feel," Penelope nodded, unable to speak. "That is good, honey. That is healthy. It hurts, but it is good." They rode back to Bitterroot Crossing 3 days later. Penelope was exhausted, hollowed out, but also strangely lighter. Something had shifted, some door had opened. She went to church the following Sunday. Fletcher was there. He was standing near the back talking to someone, and when he saw her, his whole face lit up. He crossed the room to her in 3 long strides. "I heard you went to the mining camp," he said. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." "You could have gotten sick." "I did not." He looked at her closely, reading something in her face. "Something happened." "Yes." "Do you want to talk about it?" She glanced around the crowded church. "Not here. Could you come by later?" "Of course." He showed up at her cabin that afternoon. She made coffee and they sat at her table, and she told him everything. About the sick children, about the little girl who had nearly died, about the way it had broken her open and forced her to feel things she had been avoiding for so long. "I realized something," she said. "I have been so afraid of losing people that I forgot how to be with them. I forgot how to connect, and that is no way to live." Fletcher nodded slowly. "So what are you going to do?" She looked at him across the table, this patient, steady man who had waited for her through seasons of grief and fear. "I am going to try. I am going to try to let people in, starting with you." His expression did not change, but she saw the hope flare in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "No. But I am sure that I want to try, and I am sure that you are worth the risk." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I am not going anywhere, Penelope. Whatever you need, however slow we need to go, I am here." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "That is why I am willing to try." They sat there in the winter afternoon light, holding hands across the table, and something that had been broken in Penelope began, very slowly, to heal. Spring returned like a promise. The snow melted and the creek roared and the meadows exploded with wildflowers. Penelope opened her windows and let the fresh air flood her cabin. She planted her garden with new energy, digging in the soil, feeling the earth come alive under her hands. Fletcher came to town every week now. They took walks along the creek. They had supper together. They talked about everything and nothing. He kissed her for the first time in April, a gentle brush of lips on her porch as the sun was setting. She kissed him back and felt her heart open wider. It was not easy. There were days when the old fear came rushing back, when she wanted to push him away and retreat behind her walls. But Fletcher never pushed. He just waited, patient as always, and eventually the fear would recede and she would reach for him again. In May, he invited her to visit his ranch. She rode up with him on a Saturday morning, the two of them on horseback climbing into the high valley. His land was beautiful, rolling meadows surrounded by mountains, a creek running clear and cold through the center. His cabin was larger than hers, well built, with a barn and corrals and a few outbuildings. "You built all this?" she asked. "Most of it. Had some help with the barn." She could see the pride in his face, the satisfaction of a man who had made something with his own hands. He showed her around, introducing her to his horses, his cattle, his bees. He showed her the garden he had started, the woodpile he had been building all winter. It was a life, solid and real and thriving. "It is lonely sometimes," he admitted, "being up here by myself, but it is also peaceful." "I can see that." They ate lunch on the porch, looking out over the valley. The sun was warm and the air smelled of pine and new grass. Penelope felt something settle in her chest, some old tension finally releasing. "I could see myself here," she said quietly. Fletcher went still. "What?" "I said I could see myself here, living here, with you." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I am ready, not just to try, to commit, to build a life with you, Penelope." His voice was rough. "I love you, Fletcher. I think I have loved you for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, felt the strength of him surrounding her. When he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since that first dance. I have been waiting for you to catch up." She laughed, a real laugh, bright and free. "I am sorry I took so long. It was worth the wait." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a kiss that tasted like promise and hope and future. When they finally broke apart, Penelope felt dizzy with happiness. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we figure out the details. You move up here, or I move to town, or we build something new together. I think I would like to live here, if you will have me. If I will have you." He shook his head, smiling. "Penelope, I have been trying to have you for a year." "Well, now you can." They sat on the porch and made plans, talking through the practicalities of combining their lives. Penelope would need to finish her sewing commitments in town. Fletcher would need to prepare the cabin for 2 people. They would need to decide about a wedding, about when and where and how. "Small," Penelope said. "I do not want a big fuss. Whatever you want. Just friends and family." "At the church. Nothing fancy." "That sounds perfect." They decided on June. It gave them time to prepare, to get ready, to let the news settle. When Penelope rode back to town that evening, she felt like she was floating. The old grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She had made room for something else. For joy. For love. For hope. Sarah squealed when Penelope told her. "I knew it. I knew you two would end up together. You did not know anything. You just hoped." "Well, my hopes came true." "When is the wedding?" "June 15th. "That gives us 6 weeks. We have so much to do." Penelope laughed at her friend's enthusiasm, but secretly she was excited too. She was getting married. She was starting a new life. She was choosing hope. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Penelope sewed her own wedding dress, a simple gown in cream-colored muslin. She packed up her belongings, said goodbye to her little cabin. Friends threw her a party, gave her gifts, wished her well. Fletcher came to town every few days, helping her move things, making sure she had everything she needed. They spent hours talking about their future. They wanted children if that blessing came to them. They wanted to expand the ranch, maybe get more cattle, build a bigger house eventually. They wanted to grow old together in that mountain valley, surrounded by the land and the sky and each other. "Are you nervous?" Fletcher asked her the week before the wedding. "A little. Are you?" "No, I am sure about this, about you. I am sure too, but it still feels big. It is big." He pulled her close. But we will do it together." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Penelope stood in Sarah's house, putting on her dress, fixing her hair. Her hands were shaking slightly, but it was excitement now, not fear. Sarah helped her with the buttons, fussing over her like a mother hen. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything, for not giving up on me." "I would never give up on you. You are my dearest friend." They hugged, both of them crying now, happy tears that washed away the sadness of the past years. The church was full. Not just friends from town, but ranchers from the surrounding valleys, people Fletcher had helped over the years. Reverend Cole stood at the front, beaming. And Fletcher waited at the altar, looking nervous and proud in his best suit. When Penelope walked down the aisle, his face transformed. The nervousness vanished, replaced by pure joy. She walked toward him, feeling lighter with every step. When she reached him, he took her hand and held it tight. "You came," he said softly. "Of course I came. I know, but part of me was still afraid you would change your mind." "Not a chance." Reverend Cole began the ceremony. The words washed over Penelope like a benediction. "Love, honor, cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and health." All the promises she had made once before and thought she would never make again. But here she was, promising them to this patient, stubborn, wonderful man who had waited for her to find her way back to life. When it came time for the vows, Fletcher's voice was steady and clear. "I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to be patient with your fears and to celebrate your courage. I promise to build a home with you, to work beside you, to stand with you through whatever comes. You are my hope and my future, and I will never take that for granted." Penelope's voice shook, but she got the words out. "I promise to trust you with my heart. I promise to be brave enough to let you in, to let you see all of me, even the broken parts. I promise to build a life with you, to love you through all the seasons, to choose you every day. You taught me how to hope again, and I will never forget that gift." Reverend Cole pronounced them husband and wife. Fletcher kissed her, gentle and sweet, and the church erupted in applause. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, into the bright June sunshine. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables set up under the trees, food and music and laughter. Penelope and Fletcher danced their second dance, and this time there was no hesitation, no walls. She leaned into him and let herself feel everything. Joy, love, hope. All the things she had thought were lost forever. "I am saying yes," she whispered in his ear. "To the dance and to hope, to all of it." He held her closer. "I know, and I am saying yes too, to you, to us, to whatever comes." They danced until the sun began to set, then said their goodbyes and rode up to the ranch together. Fletcher carried her over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," he said. "It feels right," she replied. "Being here with you. It feels like where I am supposed to be." They spent their first night as husband and wife, talking and dreaming, planning the future, holding each other close. And when Penelope finally fell asleep in Fletcher's arms, she slept peacefully, without nightmares, without fear. Just contentment. The summer passed in golden happiness. Penelope settled into life at the ranch, learning its rhythms, making it her own. She expanded the garden, planted flowers around the cabin, hung curtains in the windows. She and Fletcher worked side by side, feeding cattle, mending fences, haying the meadows. It was hard physical labor, but Penelope found satisfaction in it. She was building something, creating something. With Fletcher beside her, she felt capable of anything. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains. They would talk about their day, share stories, make each other laugh. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, Fletcher whittling while Penelope sewed. It was ordinary and domestic and perfect. In August, Penelope realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Fletcher over breakfast one morning. "I think I might be with child," she said quietly. Fletcher dropped his fork. His face went pale, then flushed with emotion. "Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. It is still early." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. She could feel him shaking. "Are you all right? How do you feel?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But also happy. Is that strange?" "No, that is exactly how I feel." They held each other for a long moment. Penelope felt the old grief stir, the memory of her daughter who had not lived. But alongside it was something else. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "Then we will face it together, but maybe nothing will go wrong. Maybe this time it will be different. I want to believe that." "Then believe it. We deserve a little faith." As the weeks passed, Penelope's pregnancy became undeniable. Her body changed, her belly growing round. Fletcher was attentive and anxious, fussing over her constantly. She found it endearing and occasionally exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of vegetables. "I know, but I want to take care of you. You are taking care of me, but I can still do things." They found a balance. Penelope continued to work, but she let Fletcher take over the heavier tasks. She rested more, ate better, tried to stay calm. Sarah rode up from town once a week to check on her, bringing supplies and gossip and encouragement. "You are glowing," Sarah said one afternoon in September. "I am sweating. It is hot." "You are glowing with happiness. Do not argue with me," Penelope smiled. "All right, I am happy, terrified but happy." "That is normal. Every mother is terrified. Were you with your children?" "Absolutely. But then they arrived and all that fear turned into love." "You will see." Penelope hoped she was right. As her belly grew larger, she found herself talking to the baby, telling it stories, singing soft songs. Fletcher would put his hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick, his face full of wonder. They were becoming parents, and despite the fear, Penelope felt a sense of rightness about it. Winter came again, but this time Penelope was not alone. She and Fletcher spent the cold months preparing for the baby's arrival. They set up a cradle in the corner of the cabin, sewed tiny clothes, gathered supplies. Fletcher rode to town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, and made her promise to come as soon as Penelope's time arrived. "Even if there is a blizzard," he said. "Even if there is a blizzard, Mrs." Patterson agreed, smiling. In late February, on a night when the snow fell softly outside, Penelope's labor began. Fletcher rode through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Patterson, then paced the cabin like a caged animal while the midwife attended to his wife. Penelope labored through the night, Fletcher holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest person I know." Near dawn, with one final push, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Mrs. Patterson cleaned him up and placed him in Penelope's arms, and she stared down at his tiny face in wonder. "He is here," she whispered. "He is alive." "He is beautiful," Fletcher said, tears streaming down his face. "Just like his mother." They named him Warren Thomas Garrison, after Fletcher's father and Penelope's first husband. He was healthy and strong, nursing eagerly, sleeping in fits and starts. Penelope barely slept those first few weeks, too afraid to take her eyes off him, too aware of how fragile life could be. But slowly, as Warren grew and thrived, her fear began to ease. This baby was strong. He was going to live. Fletcher was a devoted father, walking the floor with Warren when he fussed, changing his nappies without complaint, singing to him in his rough baritone. Watching them together, Penelope felt her heart expand in ways she had not known possible. This was her family. This was the life she had thought she would never have again. Spring returned once more. Warren grew chubby and alert, his eyes tracking movement, his little hands grasping at everything. Penelope carried him in a sling while she worked in the garden, talking to him constantly. Fletcher would come in from the fields and sweep them both into his arms, kissing his wife and son with equal affection. One evening in May, they sat on the porch with Warren between them, watching the sunset. The mountains were purple against the pink sky. The creek murmured in the distance. Everything was peaceful. "I never thought I would be this happy," Penelope said. Fletcher looked at her. "Neither did I. We are lucky." "We are." He reached for her hand. "But we also chose this. We chose to take the risk. We chose hope." She squeezed his hand. "You chose first. You were patient enough to wait for me. You were worth waiting for." Warren made a small noise, and they both looked down at him. His eyes were drooping, nearly asleep. Penelope felt a surge of love so intense it was almost painful. "You think we will have more?" she asked. "Children?" "If you want them." "I think I do. Maybe one more. Then we will." 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Clementine Rose, and she was a tiny, fierce thing from the start, with Fletcher's gray-blue eyes and Penelope's determination. Warren, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her to help take care of her. The ranch prospered. Fletcher expanded the herd, built additional corrals, hired a man to help with the work. Penelope turned part of the cabin into a sewing room and took on occasional commissions from women in town. They were busy and tired and happier than they had ever imagined possible. On a summer evening when Warren was 5 and Clementine was 3, the family sat together on the porch. The children were playing in the grass, chasing fireflies. Fletcher and Penelope sat in their rocking chairs, hands linked, watching. "You remember that first dance?" Fletcher asked. "Of course. You told me you were patient with both the dance and the hope. And you told me you would not give me hope. I was wrong." She looked at him. "You gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe in the future again, and now look at us." "Look at us," he agreed. "Two broken people who put each other back together. We are not broken anymore. No. We are whole." Warren came running up to the porch, firefly cupped in his hands. "Look, Papa, I caught one." Fletcher leaned down to admire it. "That is a good catch. Now let it go so it can fly free." Warren opened his hands and the firefly drifted away, blinking its light into the dusk. Clementine clapped her hands in delight. "Again," she demanded. "You go catch one yourself," Warren told her, and they ran off together into the meadow. Penelope leaned her head against Fletcher's shoulder. "This is everything I never knew I needed. For me too. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for taking the risk." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, their children's laughter floating back to them on the evening breeze. The past was still there, the losses and the grief, but they no longer defined the present. Penelope had learned to carry her sorrow alongside her joy, to honor what had been lost while embracing what she had found. She had said yes to the dance all those years ago, and then, slowly, painfully, hopefully, she had said yes to life again. Fletcher had waited for her with the patience of a man who understood that healing could not be rushed, that love sometimes needed time to grow in rocky soil, and now they had this. A family, a home, a future. The years rolled on like the seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and blessings. Warren grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and looks. Clementine was bright and bold, afraid of nothing. Fletcher and Penelope grew older together, their hair graying, their faces lined with laughter and sun. They added onto the cabin, building more rooms as the children grew. They survived hard winters and dry summers, lost cattle to wolves and gained calves in the spring. They went to church in town, celebrated holidays with friends, helped neighbors in need. They built a life, piece by piece, day by day, and it was good. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Penelope would think about Thomas and the daughter she had lost. The grief was still there, softer now, like an old scar that ached in cold weather. But it no longer consumed her. She had learned that it was possible to love the people she had lost while also loving the people she had found. Her heart was big enough for all of it. Fletcher understood this without her having to explain. He had his own ghosts, his own memories. But together they had created something new, something that honored the past while reaching toward the future. They had taken their broken pieces and built something beautiful. One autumn evening, when Warren was 12 and Clementine was 10, the family rode into town for the harvest dance. It was the same hall where Penelope and Fletcher had shared their first dance all those years ago. The building looked shabbier now, the paint peeling, but the music was still lively and the people were still warm. Warren and Clementine ran off to play with the other children. Fletcher offered Penelope his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked, that same half-smile she had fallen in love with. "Always," she said. They moved onto the floor and fell into the familiar rhythm, their bodies knowing exactly how to move together after all these years. Penelope rested her head on his shoulder and felt utterly content. "You remember our first dance?" she asked. "I was just thinking about it. I told you I would say yes to the dance but not to hope. And I told you I was patient with both." She pulled back to look at him. "You were right to be patient. I just needed time. We both did. We needed to find each other at the right moment when we were both ready. Do you think we would have found each other if it had been a different time? I do not know, but I am glad it was when it was. I am glad we found each other at all." They danced through several songs, lost in their own world. Eventually, Clementine tugged on Penelope's skirt, wanting to dance with her father. Fletcher swept his daughter into his arms, spinning her around while she giggled. Penelope stood at the edge of the floor, watching her family, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. This was what hope looked like. Not the absence of fear or grief, but the courage to build something beautiful despite them. This was what love looked like when it was allowed to grow slowly, patiently, in its own time. This was what home felt like when you finally stopped running from yourself and let someone in. Sarah appeared at her side, older now but still smiling. "Look at you, crying at a dance." "Happy tears," Penelope said, wiping her eyes. "I know, I am happy for you. You deserve all of this. So do you. You never gave up on me." "Of course not. You are my dearest friend. I knew you would find your way back to life eventually. With a little help. With a lot of help from a very patient cowboy." They laughed together, watching Fletcher spin Clementine again while Warren rolled his eyes at his sister's dramatics. It was an ordinary moment at an ordinary dance in an ordinary town, but to Penelope, it was everything. When the dance ended and they rode home under the stars, Warren and Clementine drowsing in the wagon bed, Fletcher driving with one hand and holding Penelope's hand with the other, she felt the completeness of it all. This was the life she had chosen. The life she had been brave enough to reach for despite her fear. "I love you," she said into the quiet night. "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "Always have, always will. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for being worth the wait." The wagon rolled on through the darkness, carrying them home to the ranch, to the life they had built together. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Around them, the mountains stood eternal and strong. And within the wagon, a family traveled together, bound by love and patience and hope. The years continued to pass as years do. Warren grew into a thoughtful young man, strong and capable, helping his father run the ranch. Clementine became a spirited young woman, independent and clever, with her mother's courage and her father's steadiness. Fletcher and Penelope grew old together, their love deepening with every season. They faced challenges, of course. A drought one year that tested their resources. A winter so harsh that they lost part of the herd. The inevitable aches and pains of aging bodies. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Penelope back to the church where they had married. They stood at the altar, holding hands, and renewed their vows with their children as witnesses. Warren stood tall and proud. Clementine dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I promise to keep loving you every day," Fletcher said, his voice still steady even though his hair was now completely silver. "To keep choosing hope, to keep building this life with you." "I promise to keep trusting you with my heart," Penelope replied, her own hair gray now, her face lined but beautiful. "To keep being brave enough to love you, to keep choosing you every single day." They kissed, and their children applauded, and for a moment Penelope was transported back to that first wedding day, when everything had felt so new and fragile and possible. Now it was solid and real and tested by time. They had built something that lasted. That evening back at the ranch, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains were purple in the twilight. The creek sang its eternal song. Everything was exactly as it should be. "You have any regrets?" Penelope asked. Fletcher thought for a moment. "None. Everything in my life led me to you, and I would not change any of it. Even the hard parts, even those. They made me who I am. They taught me patience. They prepared me to wait for you." Penelope leaned against him. "I used to think hope was foolish, that it was just setting yourself up for disappointment. And now I think hope is the bravest thing we can choose. It is choosing to believe in goodness even when you have been hurt. It is choosing to love even when you know you might lose." "You taught me that," Fletcher said. "Watching you find your way back to hope taught me that courage is not about never being afraid. It is about being afraid and choosing to live anyway." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged. Inside the house, they could hear Warren and Clementine talking, the sounds of their children living their own lives, making their own choices. The ranch would continue. The family would continue. The love would continue. "I said yes to the dance," Penelope murmured. "And then I said yes to hope. And then I said yes to you, best decisions I ever made." "I am glad you said yes. I would have waited forever if I needed to. I know. That is why I said yes." Fletcher pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. They rocked gently in their chairs. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen to build a life together despite their fears and wounds. They had been patient with each other and with themselves, and that patience had yielded this harvest of love and family and contentment. As the night deepened and the stars multiplied overhead, Penelope felt the same sense of peace she had felt on her wedding day, only deeper now, richer, tested and proven by 20 years of life together. This was what it meant to truly live, she thought. Not to avoid pain or loss, but to embrace the fullness of existence, the joy and the sorrow together, the risk and the reward. She had said yes to hope, and hope had given her everything. A partner who understood her, children who filled her days with purpose and love, a home that was truly hers. A future she no longer feared but welcomed. And most of all, she had found herself again, the woman she had been before grief had tried to bury her. She was whole. She was happy. She was home. Fletcher's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. They sat together in their rocking chairs, two souls who had weathered storms and come through stronger, and watched the night settle over their valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new blessings, but tonight there was just peace and presence and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived together. Inside the house, Warren laughed at something Clementine said. The sound drifted out to the porch, pure and joyful. Fletcher and Penelope smiled at each other. No words needed. This was their legacy, this happiness, this family, this love that had grown from seeds planted patiently in difficult soil. The cowboy had been patient with both the dance and the hope, and his patience had been rewarded beyond measure. The widow had found the courage to say yes again, to risk her heart again, and her courage had been rewarded with a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. Together, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of patience and hope and choosing love even when it felt impossible. As the moon rose over the mountains and the night birds began their songs, Penelope Nash Garrison sat beside her husband and knew with absolute certainty that every painful step of her journey had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love. She had said yes to the dance and eventually yes to hope, and in doing so, she had said yes to the fullest, most authentic version of herself. And it was good. It was all very, very good.